Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Goldster Inside Story. I am absolutely thrilled today to have with us Eva Rice. Now, this is her new book. It's completely gorgeous. Cannot recommend it highly enough. This could be everything. And I was very excited when I saw this was coming out because I loved Eva's earlier book called The Lost Art of Keeping Secrets. So welcome, Eva. Thank you so much for joining us on Goldster today.
Thank you so much for having me. Very pleased to be here.
So I know you've done different types of writing in your life. I wanted to ask, why did you start writing? Was it something you always wanted to do? Was it something you did as a child, or was it something that came to you in adulthood?
I think if you're a writer in your soul, which sounds terribly pretentious, you always want to do it. And it's just in you from the word go. And that isn't to say that it's some kind of amazing spiritual gift bestowed on you, but I think you always know that it's in you because you just do it. So I was always fascinated when I was even very young at school by literally by handwriting itself, by the actual act of handwriting. And I would always try and I'd be quite competitive to see who'd got the fastest handwriting in the class. And then I taught myself to type really quickly because I liked seeing my dad's kind of primitive, Apple computers around, and I'd be kind of sitting down and trying to teach myself to type without looking, more as a sort of challenge than anything else. But everything to do with writing always fascinated me, and obviously books and reading. And I just couldn't understand why people wouldn't want to read all the time once I'd learned to read. So yeah, it was always something that was in me. It wasn't like I suddenly thought, oh, I think, it'd be nice to be a writer when I was sort of 20. It's just something that drives you from the word go, in the same way that I suppose if you're a doctor, you're very interested in the human body from the word go. Yeah, it's just always been in me.
And do you still write by hand? Do you still enjoy that handwriting?
Well, I do. I mean, more now. I would do it as a sort of, I guess, something that's more associated with maybe writing letters or thank you letters, that sort of thing. I wouldn't say that I don't write that much longhand when I'm writing fiction anymore. I make notes, but I don't write out the book so much, which is maybe a bit of a shame. But I've always loved typing and font and all the details that go with the act of typing. So yeah, that's always sort of kept me quite happy.
I used to write a lot when I was younger, and I would write copious letters. And now when I try and write by hand, my hand kind of
Oh yeah,
cramps up, and my handwriting's awful now.
It's really strange, and obviously the younger generation have got real problems with handwriting because they do it so little compared to us, which is interesting. But I think, yeah, it's one of those skills you have to kind of keep yourself going with and get your lovely stationery and make sure you don't lose it, because it is definitely something. I remember at school when you did a kind of 3-hour exam and you were really in the zone of writing and you could just do it and your hand was fine. And now if I did that, I think my hand would be sort of numb after half an hour.
I wrote a couple of birthday cards the other day and thought, this is ridiculous that I'm finding this a real challenge.
I know, it's so
myself a task of handwriting lessons like back at school.
I know, it's true.
And you started life as a singer-songwriter. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I've always done music and I've always been in bands. So I guess I was just in a band when I was at university, and I still do a lot of music. I've got a couple of musicals in the pipeline, so I've always kept writing music and kept singing as much as I can. And it just went really well with writing fiction for me because they were both creative in slightly different ways. But obviously, lyrics involve words, and that was always my great interest. And combining that with music is, to me, the ultimate thrill, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, writing books is very difficult, and sometimes just writing a song that you can kind of do in a much shorter space of time, and you can get to the end of it and think, oh, that's quite nice, and it feels like a more immediate experience, a more kind of immediate, satisfying, complete conclusion that you can come to, instead of writing a book, which is a bit like, well, sometimes it can be a bit like doing and being set a very, very long essay that you kind of have to get through chapter by chapter, and it's really hard. So I like music as a form of escape still. Yes.
So let's talk about This Could Be Everything. How long did this book take you to? I'm just going to hold it up again so everyone can see it. How long did it take you to write, and what was the process of writing it like?
Well, weirdly, I wrote This Could Be Everything in lockdown during the pandemic, which was are actually much easier for me in a way than writing normally, because everyone was limited in terms of where they could go and what they could do. So I wasn't even driving my children anywhere. So that's what normally breaks up my day, is some child-related activity involving, you know, getting in the car and going to take a child to football or cricket or something, or driving them back from school. And so when everyone was doing, you know, online school, although I had to help my then 9-year-old with his work, which was, you know, at times challenging, because I'd sort of be starting to do some work and then suddenly he'd be shouting, what did they do for fun in the Middle Ages? And I'd be thinking, what did they do for fun? By the way, seems to involve a lot of throwing fruit at women. Seems to be one of the pastimes. But apart from that, I was able to, because my 2 elder children were quite good at getting on with the work, luckily for me. So I found myself able to sit down and not be distracted for a greater period of time than I normally would. So I got this book done really fast, like 4 months, which for me was very quick. And then the first draft anyway. And then I was able to come back and edit it when things were getting a bit more back to normal. But by that point, I'd at least done the first draft, which for me is the first massive hurdle, because once you've done that, even though you know bits of it are completely wrong, you can chip away at the block of clay and perfect it as much as you can. So this book was a bit of an outlier in that sense for me, because it was written under circumstances I wouldn't normally be in, and actually for me as a writer were quite favorable. So I felt quite, you know, grateful that I was able to get through it in an easier way than lots of other people.
So, without giving any spoilers to those who haven't read it, tell us a little bit about This Could Be Everything. What is the plot of your novel?
Well, the basic idea of the book is that, well, it's set in 1990 for a start, and the idea that the opening chapter is based on something that happened to me, which is that a canary flew through the window of my kitchen in my flat in Notting Hill a long time ago when I was in my early 20s, and I ended up keeping it because nobody claimed it, and I ended up basically breeding canaries from this experience, which I would never ever have chosen to I wouldn't have bought a canary, because I don't really like the idea of a caged bird.
Mm-hmm.
So when I ended up keeping it, I bought a cage that was big enough to for 4 parakeets. I bought it such a huge cage, and then he was singing constantly for a mate, and I realized that I had to buy him a friend. So I bought him a female canary, and then they ended up building a nest and having babies. And so I went through this whole sort of experience for a couple of years of being a canary breeder on the side. And I thought, gosh, this is a really weird thing to have happened, because if the canary hadn't flown into my kitchen, I would never have kept it. And I always felt like it was a really nice opening to a story that kind of takes the narrator of the story on a journey that she was never sort of expecting to be on. And when the story begins, she's going through a great period of trauma in her life, and she's only 19. And the canary is the kind of catalyst to a journey of hope and getting her out of this dark place that she's in. Yeah.
You mentioned that it's set in 1990. For me, it was so nostalgic, and I love how much, obviously, because you're a singer as well, you've got so much music in here. And I found myself having to stop and go onto the internet and go, oh my God, now I can't remember that song. And then it would come up, oh, of course I can remember that song, and I could remember dancing to it. It's wonderfully evocative of that time. What was it like going back to 1990, when you were a time when you were in your teens?
Yeah,
trying to get that time period.
It was weird in a way, because I was a bit younger than the character, only by a couple of years, but by her, I was sort of 15 in 1990. So it was a slightly, my kind of real experience of kind of coming into adulthood in the 90s was more the mid 90s, but I like setting books in the kind of period of the decade before people kind of remember the decade, if you see what I mean. So this was pre-Britpop, this was pre-Tony Blair, this was pre-New Labour, pre-Cool Britannia, coming out of the 80s, and this really quite interesting period of change. And the Berlin Wall was falling. It was a very interesting period in Europe. It was a very interesting period in this country, and the music as well was really strange, because we hadn't quite got into Blur, Oasis, Pulp, Suede. We were still in a sort of quite weird time of kind of very early Britpop bands sort of starting to come out, but no one really quite knowing what direction it was going in. So there was sort of the Stone Roses and Happy Mondays and that sort of Manchester scene, but it hadn't quite established itself. And at the same time, there was also a lot of really quite bad sort of Eurotrash dance music going on. And then a lot of stuff from really older artists who were just either releasing covers or had kind of were hanging around in the charts. They'd been around for a long time. So it was a real mashup of strange music. And I actually found online you could listen to Bruno Brooks counting down the top 40 for real, as if it was in real time. So I listened to that a lot, and that was really strange because you've just felt like you were there and you were listening to him go, you know, counting down the top 40, and I felt like, oh my gosh, that's number 14, that's number 13. You know, it was really amazing to be able to have that experience of listening to the entire chart again, what was going up and down and what was number one. And that was really helpful to the book as well.
And it took me back to that time when I used to tape the charts and listen to
Yes.
it, which is what your character does. It really, and I can see a couple of people nodding there, obviously did the same. And it just really took me back. It's such a nostalgic book in a really beautiful way. You create that sense of place as well. For those of us who know London well, it really is echoed in this. It's a kind of love song almost to parts of London. Was that intentional, or was that just because it's where you live and you just wrote about it naturally?
No, that was completely intentional, because I think everyone, when they're, you know, in their mid-teens, if they have, you know, a good or a sort of, I don't know, or that kind of coming of age feeling that you have in your mid-teens through to about 20, where you are and where you have that experience is incredibly important and stays with you, I think, probably good and bad, whether you like it or not. And because so much of my life at that point was played out in West London, it felt very it was almost like I could almost go back down the streets and sort of remember kind of what shops were lined up down Kensington High Street or in Notting Hill. And I wanted it to be very much of the era, so that it was something you felt like you could dive into and feel I'm really there at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. We've got a question here, a really good question, I think. What difference do you find between writing novels and writing music?
Well, like I said, it's nice to write songs because you feel like you can do it reasonably quickly in some cases compared to writing novels. There's no question to me that writing novels takes a lot more discipline and a lot more what's the word? I think discipline is probably the word. It's that thing of having to really instruct yourself to sit down and do it, because you have to go through the pain barrier with it. I think maybe a little bit more than with music, which even if you're sitting at a piano and you can't really do anything, you're not really feeling particularly creative, you can play something you've done before and you can get some enjoyment out of that. Whereas with writing a novel, you really dive in and then you're really stuck in it, and it can be quite a harrowing experience because you think, oh my gosh, I haven't written anything good for 3 days or a week, or I've got to get myself out of this kind of swamp that I'm in at the moment with it. And that can be really hard. Whereas writing music is also something you can do with other people. That's the crucial difference. Yeah. I find writing songs or writing anything musical that involves collaboration can be incredibly refreshing when you're used to sitting down on your own, on your computer without anyone else there. That's something I still find hard.
Yeah. That's a really interesting thought about the lack of collaboration with novels. I've never really thought about that before. What a fascinating thing, though, to be able to write both. We're going to talk about your musicals a bit later because I'm very interested in these. But going back to This Could Be Everything, your characterization is really beautiful, and you create these characters who we believe in and empathize with. What is your process of coming up with a character? Do they kind of arrive in your head, or do you sit there and work them out? And what's your process of creating them?
Some of them arrive in my head and some of them change completely when I start. I think this person's just going to be in briefly and they're going to be this character and they're going to have that personality, and they really can change. And I think that's part of the process for me. I'm not very good at sitting down and planning exactly how a character is going to be and sticking to that plan. I think there's a quote, and I can't remember what it is, about, you know, you're almost as surprised as the readers when your character does something. Sometimes they're like, oh, I didn't think they were going to do that, but they've done that. And that can genuinely happen. I think you have to have a rough idea of what your characters are like. And with this character, I wanted her to have, because she's so full of anxiety to begin with, that gave her a kind of urgency, which I think comes out in the actual text. So it's quite frantic at times because you've got her brain working very, very quickly, trying to process certain situations. And the high anxiety that she feels, that was quite important in that character. But other characters I thought were only going to be in for a few pages, and they ended up staying for a much longer time. And then you have to kind of check yourself and think, do I still like this character? You know, are they taking up too much of my time? Do I like them too much? Are they driving the plot forward enough? So it's a constant battle between sort of getting a bit carried away because you like what a character's saying or doing, and making sure the book is still moving forward.
And tell us a little bit about February. Describe her to everybody.
February Kingdom is the narrator, and she is she's in a very dark place when the book begins, but she's also she's really wanting to get out of this place, but she doesn't quite know how. She's a sportswoman in a way. Like, she was very, very good at tennis, and her sister, who is no longer with her, is a very different character, but she was always the kind of very sporty, quite practical sister. And so being thrown into this period of darkness, she's kind of really confused. She doesn't know how to get out of it. But she's also she's quite suspicious of other people, I would say. She's not particularly open to new friends or to meeting boys or anything like that, which is why when she meets Theo, who turns out to be the boy who owns the canary, which she discovers quite early on in the book, she doesn't really know how to react to him because she's closed herself down for so long. So he represents something a bit scary to her. But she's also full of that very, very new love that you can feel in your late teens, and she wants to fall in love, but at the same time she's very nervous of it. Yeah.
And she's a really empathetic character. I mean, a sympathetic character. I can empathize with her. She's, it's just a lovely starting point to the book. We've got a question here. Are there any aspects of you in the main character?
Definitely. I think it's very hard not to write yourself into characters, even though everyone always goes, oh, it's not me, it's not me. Of course, there are bits of me in her. And she is, I think, probably the way that her mind works, the way that her mind jumps very quickly from one subject to another. I'm not as good as at tennis as her, unfortunately, but I have that competitive spirit that I think she has. Yeah, I mean, there's lots about her that isn't like me. Her obsession with music and the charts, that definitely came from what I was like at that point in history. Yeah, that side of her is definitely me. Yeah.
We've got another question here. Do you feel you would have written this book if we hadn't been in lockdown?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think I would have probably approached it differently because I wouldn't have had such a big stretch of time to go at it so fast. And I think the style of the book was informed by the fact that we were in lockdown, because I wrote the first draft in a great big sort of surge. And I feel as though I was also deliberately going back to a period in history that was going to take me away from the lockdown and from the pandemic and that feeling of being, what's going to happen next in the world. I wanted to write something that was set far enough in the past not to be having to worry about that. So yeah, that definitely affected it. I think it would have been a really different book if we hadn't been in lockdown, and it wouldn't have been as good, because I think it was necessary for me to focus on it as a kind of as something that came out of this feeling of, where do I want to be that isn't now? What year would I go back to? And I really deliberately chose 1990 for that reason. So yeah, it would have been very different.
Was it an idea that had been in your mind for a while and you hadn't had a chance to write it? Or was it something that during lockdown, you thought, right, I'm going to come up with a new idea?
No, the idea had been there for a while because of the experience that I had with the Canaries. And so I always thought that would be something really fun to write about, definitely. But I think the story itself and what came out of that was really something that was influenced by the pandemic. It was also just that thing of feeling, if I was reading fiction during the pandemic, what would I want to read? Because I was kind of finding myself picking up a lot of familiar books to me during lockdown. I didn't really want to read anything particularly new. I went back to a lot of kind of tried and tested fiction that I knew was kind of comforting. And so I also wanted this book, although it starts in quite a traumatic space for February, I wanted it to be something that was ultimately hopeful.
Yeah, and I think it is. It's yeah, It's a really lovely book, as I said. I just can't recommend it highly enough. But it's really fascinating to have kind of just went into a bit of a reverie of what would it have been like if it hadn't been in lockdown. Would it have come out slightly differently? And I love the fact that it didn't, that it came out the way that it
Yeah,
did.
I think it would have been maybe a little bit less frantic and a little bit more. I don't know. I think that it really gave me a chance to go to, because the darkness that she feels at the beginning and that whole thing of being locked in her room was kind of how a lot of people felt. So that felt quite relatable, and then her slowly edging out of it via the canary. And also it was really nice to imagine things like going to music venues and being with friends and being out in the streets at a time when nobody could. That was quite cathartic and nice to write about at a time when no one could. I could never have written a book about, I don't think I could ever write a book that was set in lockdown or in the pandemic, as it's kind of, it's just not, I think there are probably loads of people who will do it brilliantly, but that's never going to be me.
Yeah. No, I can understand. I remember during the pandemic watching something on TV when they were at a bar, all huddled in together and everyone dancing. And I felt this absolute panic of,
oh yeah,
oh my God, they're all so close together. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Why, but it was something that got into our brains so rapidly.
I know.
Imagine this was wonderful to escape.
Yes, it's so true. And actually, weirdly, the nice thing I think about it was that because I was worried, thinking, oh my gosh, maybe my children will never be able to feel at ease in that sort of situation. So actually going to big events now, I really do appreciate it more than ever before. And being in situations with friends, or being, for example, I went to see the Stones in Hyde Park last summer. With my family. It was amazing. Absolutely incredible. And so just being in a situation like that, that's when you really think, phew, we're out of that, certainly for the moment anyway.
It was absolutely astonishing. And I remember thinking this just wouldn't have been possible very recently.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You mentioned about reading a lot of fiction, which of course, if you're writing fiction, is hugely important. And I know a lot of people here are writers or aspiring writers, and it is always so important to read as much as possible. Tell us about the writers who inspire you, and who are the ones you go to for comfort reading?
Well, for comfort reading, I go back in time quite a long way. Well, I mean, not quite a long way. I love writers like Barbara Pym. I love Jilly Cooper. I've recently discovered, which is quite late in the day, Anita Bruckner, who Hotel Delight.
Amazing.
I'd never read Hotel Delight before, and I read that the other day. I thought, this is literally amazing. I love Sue Townsend. I love Ruby Ferguson. Some of the children's books that I was obsessed with, like Enid Blyton, Ruby Ferguson, Dodie Smith. I mean, there's a lot of that in what I do, my writing. And then current authors, I love Nina Stibbe. I love, I'm trying to think of current authors that I love that I really have got into. There's a brilliant book out now by a girl called Lauren Bravo called Pre-Loved, which I've just read, which is absolutely brilliant. I feel as though when I'm writing, I can get very distracted by fiction, which is you either read and think, oh, this is so good, why am I even bothering, because I'll never do anything as good as this, which I feel every time I open The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole, for example. I just think, well, I might as well just give up.
Don't give up, please don't give up.
or you sometimes read fiction, you think, oh gosh, this is, how has this sold so many copies? And I just, what am I trying to sort of almost impersonate this style, because is that going to give me a bestseller? It's quite a risky business reading too much fiction when you're actually writing. So I normally save it for when I'm actually not, when I'm editing, I'll then read fiction. When I'm actually in the middle of something, I find it can be quite off-putting. So that's why I go back to books I already know.
You mentioned Jilly Cooper, which lets us segue very neatly into, tell us about the Jilly Cooper musical that you have been writing.
It's been in the pipeline for a very long time. And we've got Jilly's sort of blessing on the whole book. It's set on it's a whole musical. It's set in the 70s, based on one of her 70s novels, pre-Riders. She wrote a lot of novels with girls' names as the titles, and this is one called Harriet, and it's set partly in Oxford and then in Yorkshire, and it's just a great Jilly coming of age love story, very funny, very heartwarming, and great characters, and it's finished, so it's ready to roll, and we've got producers, and we've got the songs are recorded, so we're kind of hoping it's going to come out really soon. It was supposed to come out kind of just before COVID, and then various problems with the theatres, as you know, happened. So it's been kind of slightly delayed, but it's still very much happening, and it's just great to have done anything with Jilly going, I really like your work, has been obviously absolutely amazing. Yeah, she's
Fantastic.
the
best. She is. She was actually a friend of my grandmother's. They lived in the same village, and she very kindly gave me an interview for my school magazine when I was about 13. I got
oh gosh,
coup of being able to interview Jilly Cooper. So
well, that must be amazing. That was her at her peak, sort of peak powers, I imagine, at that time. But
yeah.
she's still such a brilliant, inspiring woman, and she's so funny and so clever, and she's just amazing. She's such an inspiration to so many writers.
She really is. And as you say, I can't remember them in detail, but I read all of those, as you say, the novels with the girls' names when I was a teenager. So when you said Yorkshire, I was thinking, oh yeah, I think I remember the plot of Harriet. What's the process like of writing a musical then, and trying to get all those elements in place?
Well, it's very difficult and quite slow, because you go through a lot of drafts. But this one, because we already had the story, obviously, we had Jilly's story. We made a couple of changes to the characters, but not many. For example, there's a character at the beginning who is a sort of aspiring actor, and we turned him into an aspiring singer just because it made it easier.
Yes, of course.
And we kind of we got the story exactly how we wanted it, and then the script, and then worked out where the songs were going to go and what the songs were trying to say, and that's been great. I mean, the whole experience has been really collaborative, which, as we said, is very different to writing a novel, which I've really liked. And we've done a few workshops where you can actually hear the songs being sung, and you can hear the script coming to life, and that's the best experience, because you're suddenly going, wow, this really works, or gosh, that doesn't work as well as I thought it was going to. And because it's Jilly, it's got to be really funny, and so there's a lot of humor in it, and a lot of really heartwarming moments. It's great. It's the songs are quite the genres, it's hard to kind of pin it down to one genre, so it's not kind of typically musical theatre. It's quite pop, it's quite folky at times, it's quite it's got a few very, very big company numbers which are great, so it's got a bit of everything in there. But I think it's the kind of thing you should be able to come to see with, you know, your kids if they're in their teens, and also your mum. It's a kind of it should be a really amazing family show, really, which I hope is what it is.
So you say we, how many people, when you're talking about collaborating, who are the kind of what are the roles of when you're writing a musical? Who do you work with?
Well, the person who's written the script, so who's adapted the book, me in terms of the songs, and also the story.
You didn't adapt the script, you wrote the songs, somebody else?
Yeah, I wrote the songs, yes.
Ah, right.
So the script adaptation was kind of partly me, because I kind of came out with some of the sort of changes to the story at the beginning, but a different person was adapting it. And then the director, who you work with really closely in terms of getting the structure right, and how it's going to be performed on stage. So what it's going to look like on stage. The designer comes on board and says, you know, we're working within a budget, we can do this, we can have this scene for this bit, and then, you know, how are we going to show a horse race, for example, is quite hard. So it's, there's a lot of people involved, and that's what's great about it. And
were you writing with particular singers in mind, or did that happen after you'd finished?
A style of singing, definitely. I wouldn't say particular singers, as in I wasn't thinking this has got to sound like, you know, Ariana Grande or something. That side of it was quite that's got to be quite flexible, because you don't know who you're going to end up with doing the show. But we've had a few different singers doing the recordings, which has been absolutely amazing, because you have it in your head that it's going to sound like one thing, and then it comes out completely differently, and that can be wonderful. So that side of it's been really, really fun. Just getting different people to sing the songs has been brilliant.
We've had a comment here. I remember reading Jilly Cooper's Riders when I should have been revising for my GCSEs. I think Jilly Cooper is responsible for a lot of that.
Without a doubt. I mean, we used to have copies of Riders, Rivals and Polo that would just get passed around everyone until they were falling apart because you couldn't really afford hardbacks. P.S. Not many people can afford hardbacks at the moment now. Certainly not the teenagers anyway. They don't really buy hardbacks. So one person would buy the hardback and then it would just get circulated around the friends. You know, you would pass it on to the next person, and that's just how it worked. And then when the paperback came out, maybe you'd get the paperback and read it all again. Yeah, that's just how it worked back then. But yeah, Gilly is definitely responsible for a lot of grade Ds at GCSE. I will bring this up with her.
Yes, yeah, definitely. She needs to be aware of that. I also say my Gilly Cooper claim to fame is that one of her characters is named Lysander Hawksley. You know, I'm not saying the same as Lucinda Hawksley, but
I mean, yes, and Lysander
was love lives at the
character
time
he is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we've got a comment here. Do you write the music and the lyrics?
Sometimes I always write lyrics, and sometimes I write tunes as well. It depends. With Harriet, actually, most of the tunes I did, there are about 4 tunes that were collaborations, but they're mostly mine as well, which is really fun. Just a completely different experience writing music to writing words, and I love it. So yeah, that's been really, really fun.
So you just talked then about hardbacks and paperbacks, and this could be everything is still in hardback, but
yes,
when is the paperback coming out?
The paperback is out in November, so which I think is a good time for it to come out because it's pre-Christmas, and I think it's nice to have a book out at the beginning of the year that then translates into the paperback at the end of the year. I think it will probably have a different cover and look quite different, which paperbacks often do, and it's a really good chance to stick some nice quotes on the front and from nice people who've read it, and kind of do the whole thing again, hopefully for people who can afford to buy it, because hardbacks are increasingly something that it's almost like they're an advert for the paperback in a way, because the hardback comes out as a sort of show of how it is, and you know, if you want to buy it then great, but paperbacks are really where you sell most of the books. Yeah
and that's pretty quick, which is great, because frustratingly so often publishers make you wait a full year between the hardback and the paperback. So how do you how does that happen, that it's coming out that
well? I really wanted it to come out sooner than the year, and I think this book, because it's also set in the summer, which I think weirdly works quite well to have a summer book coming out in the winter, because it's when you want to be in the summer, you're reading books about the summer and the winter, which is quite fun. I buy a lot of books in that end of year period when you're kind of feeling like you're kind of in more in the evenings, and you're, you know, in the lead up to Christmas. I think it's just a good time of year for it to come out. Yeah,
that's exciting. I'm very, very pleased for you. That's great. We've got a question here. Do you think that COVID-19 inspired new kinds of creativity in creative industries such as podcasts? We're experiencing new forms of creativity springing at a much faster rate than before COVID. That's a really interesting comment. What do you think about that, Eva?
Yes, I think that's definitely true. I've a lot of people I know started doing podcasts or realized the value of doing things like online interviews and things that we just weren't really thinking about so much before. I think it's more like it was sort of fast forwarded something that probably would have happened anyway, but especially for writers, talking in a way where you didn't have to get together, but you could just talk on a Zoom or on a podcast. I think it's been undoubtedly something good that's come out of that period of time. Yes, I think so, for sure. Did you find that? I mean,
I did. I have a friend who, I was terrified of the whole online thing at first, thinking, and now I spend most of my life online, not just with Goldster, but teaching online as well. And I think it's been wonderful. I have a writing partner I've been working with on a project for the last few years, and we live in different parts of the country, and we just have regular Zoom meetings where we write together. And that is something that just in the past we always had to make the effort. He had to come down to London, and it was always a bit of a kind of diary clash problem, and it's just freed us up so much. So I think it's been amazing in many ways. And I had lots of people contacting me when I was first doing online events saying how finally there were events for people with mobility issues or people who were caring and couldn't leave home, which I thought was very moving.
Absolutely. And actually one of the most moving things I found was when we were recording some of the songs from the musical. We had to record them during lockdown, and so Toby, who was a musical director, he had to record a lot of the parts were recorded remotely, so he'd have and a lot of the people we got were in musicals on in the West End that were no longer running because they had to be off at that time. So he was able to take really superb musicians and get them to record remotely and then mix the song together at home, but through all these different parts coming from different musicians in different rooms in different parts of the country who he wasn't even meeting, but he was just recording them like this. And that was something I found really moving when I heard the finished results of all these incredible musicians who were out of work at that time, who were able to do something creative and come together and record a song without even being in the room together, and yet it was still incredibly collaborative. So I think there's a lot to be said for it. Yeah.
So let's go back to your earlier book, The Lost Art of Keeping Secrets. Tell us about that book.
Well, I wrote Lost Art of Keeping Secrets in 2004, and it came out in 2005, 2006. And it's a coming of age story set in the mid 50s. So very much a vintage book in a way, in its setting. And it was inspired by a lot of writers I was reading at the time, like Nancy Mitford, Dodie Smith, Ruby Ferguson. And it wasn't necessarily something that my agent at the time thought was going to work. And actually I ended up changing agents in order to be with an agent who believed that it was a great thing to write about something in the 50s. And I just kind of got to the end of it and thought, well, I like this book because it's the kind of thing I would like to read. So I've written something I'd like to read. And then amazingly, it was picked up by the Rich and Judy Book Club, which at the time was very big because it was on, well, it is always big, but it was on telly at the time. So it had a huge audience. And so really because of that, because of being featured on TV, it sold lots of copies and did really well, which was great because it kind of proved that writing books, because I was in my late 20s at the time, but I was writing a book set way before I was born. And a lot of people had sort of said, why don't you just write something set in the present day? Why are you writing something set in the past? Is that going to be hard to engage with people of your own age? And the answer to that was no. They all really like it because of the fact that it's set in the past and it's a kind of escapism read. And the lead character was very young, and it's about friendship and home, and it's coming out of the war. So it's a lot of kind of people picking up their lives post-war and starting again. And it's about the beginning of rock and roll and being a teenager before the word teenager had even been invented.
Yes.
So it was really fun to write. Yeah.
And talking of TV, is it right that it's being developed as a TV series now?
It is at the moment, which is very exciting. It's with two really, really good production companies. And we're currently talking to some exciting potential actors and directors who are interested in it, which would be so amazing. I mean, it's very expensive to do because it's set in the 50s, which means that, you know, if you wanted a set piece set on the street in 1955, that's not going to be cheap. It's not like sort of doing something set in 2 rooms in 2023. But it's got a lot of interest because I think a lot of this kind of escapism TV is very much what people want to watch at the moment. And it's been really fun because I'm adapting the script with my brother, which has been incredibly fun because we've been able to go back to the book and go, oh, why don't we make that character come into it a bit more? Or why don't we make that bit happen a bit later? Which for TV is something you can do. And it's been incredibly fun and exciting. So yeah, fingers crossed that it's all going to happen.
Gosh, so normally when I look at adaptations on TV and I wonder what the author thinks about them changing things from the book, but you are actually doing that yourself, and you're enjoying that process.
Yeah, I really am. And I feel as though, I mean, maybe I was too willing to change stuff. Like the first meeting I had with one of the production companies, and they were saying, would you mind if we, you know, if this bit happens a tiny bit later, and if this character doesn't actually, you know, do this at this point? And I was like, fine, do it. I don't care. It's going to be on TV. And then I thought, oh no, I'm just being a bit, just kind of letting them do anything. So I had to kind of go, no, come on, this is your book. Actually, the excitement of it being on TV was sort of almost too much. I was kind of going, no, it's fine. Do whatever you want. Take the characters anywhere.
But then also it will encourage people to read the book as well. So you'll get a whole new generation.
That's what I'm hoping. And actually what's really nice is that one of the potential actors who came to us, she came to us saying, this is my favorite book and I really want to do it. And she's only currently 21. So it's nice that it's being picked up by that generation, because it did have a 10th anniversary release in about 2015. So it did pick up a lot of new readers at that point. Yeah.
So you've talked about the fact that you were in a band when you were in bands, you've toured quite a lot, and you've also talked about that very different thing of writing on your own as opposed to collaborating. How do you
Yes.
reconcile those two parts of yourself? Do you miss being on tour? Do you still manage to go out and sing much at the moment, or is it all
Um,
writing?
Funnily enough, I went to see the band Razorlight this week because I was in a band with the drummer from Razorlight for a while, who's one of my great friends. And so I went to see him, and I just got a real thing of thinking, oh, I so want to be in a band. Because it was just great to be there and see an amazing band who've done really well.
Yeah.
Touring their greatest hits, and they're just brilliant. And he's just an incredible drummer, and I do get that feeling of missing that pop hit. But whenever I go to the recording studio, I get it back again, and then I think, oh, this is what I want to do. I just want to be doing more music. So it's an amazing thing to be able to dip in and out of. Yeah, I love it.
And do you see yourself starting that again?
Well, I mean, at my age, I kind of feel like, oh, maybe I have my time of doing some music.
No,
Yeah, I know
you can't let age be a factor.
No, and weirdly, it's a strange thing because I think now, one of the great things about doing music now is that you can carry on doing music when you're a lot older. It used to be, I think, maybe in the 90s, 80s, when you kind of felt like if you hadn't released just a best-selling album by the time you were 25, then you might as well just forget it. But now there's a lot more openness, and that's one of the things I've noticed about some of the younger artists I've worked with, is that they're much more open to people who are a lot older or who are not the kind of stereotypical pop stars. That they're very that's one of the things I love about the 20 somethings now, is that they're very kind of open to listening to people who've had experience and going, great, you want to make an album and you're in your 40s, in your 50s, brilliant, we don't care, that's great, which I don't think would have been the case before at all. I think that's sort of Britney Spears, kind of Christina Aguilera, that whole time was pretty, to use Britney's word, toxic in a way, in that it propelled these girls into this situation that they felt like they had to be this certain thing, and you were on such a short lifespan, so that as soon as you hit a certain age, you'd kind of had it and you were thrown on the pile of has-beens. I don't think that's the case now, and I think people fight for that not to be the case, especially girls and women, and I think it is possible. So who knows? I would love to do something else again musically. Yes, definitely.
And are you writing a new novel at the moment, or are you having some much deserved time off?
Well, I've just started work on one, but what I tend to do is I spend a lot of time thinking and kind of literally talking out loud sometimes through the plot and the process and what it's going to be, and then I kind of sit down and do it almost with the idea of where I'm going in my head. So that's kind of the point I'm at now. But I've been really kind of focused on This Could Be Everything because it's been the one that's been out in the last few months. So it's kind of been my main focus, and that's been quite hard to take my head out of that to go into something new. But that's what I'm doing now. Yes.
So tell us about your process when you're working on a novel. I mean, at the very beginning, before you even start the writing, what is the process that you go through? And then when you actually start it, how is
the process at the beginning is really getting characters into my head. Am I going to be narrating it from a first person point of view? Is it going to be third person? And what year am I setting this book in? And where do I want to be at the end of it? So yes, a real kind of jumble of feelings and kind of, how am I going to get from A to B? Slightly terrified, a bit like kind of getting into a boat and thinking, I've got to get to the other side of this lake. This is really scary. Am I going to fall off? I'll never be able to do it ever again. I'm never going to write anything good. All those feelings that every neurotic writer has. And then I think once you can get past sort of 10% of the book, you're okay. My dad doesn't like flying, and neither do I. And we have this 10% theory on a flight. However long the journey is, you work out what 10% of the journey time is. And then once you've done that, you sort of think, well, we've done 10% and the plane's okay, so it's probably going to be fine. So that's kind of how I try to think with the book as well. Like, just get that first 10% done. And
that's
then
a great theory. I love that, because I don't enjoy flying either. I think that's wonderful. I'm going to remember that 10%.
Yes, because you think, well, the plane's taken off. It's coasting now. It's sort of okay. Someone's offered me a drink. I'm going to relax now. Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. So anybody here who's got anything they're going through that they're finding difficult, remember the
Yes.
10% rule.
Yes, just get the first 10% out the way. If it's writing, that's a really good one, because then you sort of feel like it's the word count thing, which all writers are terrible at. Like, how many words have I done? You know, how many have I done today? How many more have I got to do? It can really drag you down.
And when you start writing, do you have a set number of hours per day? Do you have a set number of words? What's your process with completing a novel?
I find that quite hard to stick to, because sometimes you might only write a small number of words, but you're really pleased with them. And other days you might do 2,000 words and think, but they're all awful. I just try to think, as long as I think I've done, a couple of hours, and it doesn't matter if I've only done, it might end up being more than a couple of hours. I think it's good to try and think, I'm going to try and do at least 2 hours. And then with any luck, you can do 4. But I find more than that hard, I have to say.
Yeah. And how do you, when you're writing it and you're trying to kind of get your brain into gear, do you have a particular exercise routine or something? You mentioned tennis earlier. Are there ways that you kind of find yourself almost meditating on the plot when you're doing
that 100% walking the dog? That's my thing, although he's not particularly well behaved, so that if he sort of behaves badly, that can totally distract me. But I like the regularity of a walk, that you sort of know where you're going and you can be outside. I find just the process of walking incredibly helpful, which I think is the same with lots of writers. Yeah,
we've got a comment here: swimming works for me. And I'm third of the way through mine. Is that the third of the way through your novel, I wonder? How exciting. Yes. She's nodding. Brilliant. Well done. That's excellent. We have quite a lot of writers on Goldster. We have a creative writing class as well. So
gosh, brilliant. Well, good work, and good luck to anyone who's doing anything creative and writing. It's really nice to be in a community when you're doing it. That is for absolute sure. Yeah,
definitely. That's so brilliant. And I think when you've reached that 1/3 point, that to me actually is that psychological moment of 1/3. Right, I can do this now. I'm almost there with my current
you're on track. It's great. It's a great feeling. Yeah, it really.
Yeah, I think that's great. So many authors who come on here talk about walking their dog. I think dogs are responsible for a lot of great books. I mean, we know that.
I think they really are. And also because they're such sort of levelers within a family, like, the dog always greets you the same way. It will always be there for you. I mean, all the cliches about dogs are true, and all the greatness about dogs is true, because they're great for that reason. They don't require anything from you other than sort of love and feeding, and walking, and that is very that can be a really good calming sort of influence on a writer, I think, definitely. And just also when you're writing, to have a dog in the room if you're on your own is great, because you've got that bit of company that you don't get, which can feel quite lonely. Yeah.
My dogs do really resent my laptop, and one of them has got really good at like whipping it off my knee.
That's
huge Labrador head just appears, and
I know. I feel bad if I'm on my phone with the dog. I feel like he's going, "What's she doing? Come on, get off the phone." It's weird. You totally believe that they understand that you're doing something. You're not paying them attention. Yeah,
they completely do. I was dog sitting for my friend's Labrador puppy once, and he literally jumped up on the sofa, looked over my shoulder at the laptop, and it was like he was saying, "Why is this more important than me?"
I know. I truly believe that they understand that. I really do.
They absolutely do. Now, you've got an event coming up, haven't you?
Yes.
Tell us about this event that's happening for anybody in London who can go. It's on the 25th of May at Waterstones in Notting Hill.
That is with my friend Georgina Moore, who's a lovely writer. She actually is. I knew her originally because she works at Headline Publishing when I had Lost Art of Keeping Secrets out, and she did all the publicity for that. She's a publishing industry sort of tour de force, because she's been in the industry for a long time, and she's an incredible PR publicity woman, and this is her first novel. It's her debut novel that she is talking about with me, and I'm talking about This Could Be Everything. And she writes in this novel, it's about sisters, and it's about family, and it's called The Garnet Girls, and it's been done really well. She's had really good success with it, and we've done a couple of events together, and because we're sort of old friends, we know each other well, it works really well. And it's fun also as a writer to bounce your thoughts off another author. Always is great fun. So if anyone's around in Notting Hill on the 25th, then please do come along. It should be really fun.
And I've put a link in the chat, but you can also just find it by going to the Waterstones website as well.
Yes, great.
So is there anything else that you're working on at the moment? We've talked about Harriet. You mentioned musicals in the plural.
Yes, there's a couple of other musicals I'm working on. One is an adaptation of a book which is, I'm not even sure if I'm supposed to say what it is, which is a bit
Okay.
annoying, but it's a young adult book, and it's really good and it's really fun. That's another one. So that's been a great distraction from when I feel like I'm stuck on a novel. That's been another thing that's been really fun to do. Yeah, so hopefully lots of exciting things happening soon.
And do you enjoy working on lots of different things at the same time? Do you find that that keeps you fresh?
Yes, I really do. Although you need the focus of if there's something, if you're trying to write a book, it's very difficult to have too much else going on. So you do have to keep that focus. But it's great to have. I find it better to set a week aside for one thing and a week for another, rather than doing one day here or half a day there. That can be a bit. Your head gets a bit scrambled by that. Yeah. But
So
generally, I love it.
who do you trust to read your novels? So when you've done your first draft, is it family members? Is it just your agent?
My agent, my brother, my partner, my great friend. I have a great friend who's also a writer called Kate Weinberg. She's my best friend from school. She's a great writer. She had a debut out a couple of years ago, and she's just finished another book. She's an incredible editor. So yes, you have to have your trusted group. I think it's unwise to go. I don't know if this is helpful to anyone else who's doing the creative writing, but if you give it to too many people, you can get a bit kind of clouded. But I do think it's important to take books to people who have a variety of different viewpoints. So if you only ever take to people who you think are going to focus in on, the character or the style and not the plot, that's not going to work. You have to kind of, and also people of different ages, and men, women. I think it's good not only to give your book to women, even though a lot of fiction is read by women. I always find a male eye on it incredibly helpful, because they just come, they're quite direct and they come straight to the point on things you wouldn't think of, like, oh, I got a bit bored in that chapter and I was like, what's happened to this girl? I really liked her in that bit, and why is she gone? And actually that's really useful.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're slightly thinking, oh no, I don't want to know what you think of it, just give it to them and see what they say, is my advice.
So tell us about a misinterpretation, have I got this right, of Tara Jupp? Have I got that name? Yes.
Yes.
I always find that word really hard to say.
I know, it is really hard. Yeah, it is a hard word. That was a sort of sequel to Lost Art. It's kind of a sequel, but it isn't really, in that it just takes one of the characters from Lost Art, who was a kind of who's Penelope's brother, and tells his story through another character, Tara Jupp. That book is partly set in Cornwall, and it's set a bit later. It's set in the early 60s, 1963, 62, 63. I really loved writing this book. It's actually my favorite, probably, of my books at the moment.
That's interesting.
Weirdly, because of maybe the Cornish setting, and I just really loved writing it. It was a really fun one to write. So because it does take the plot of Lost Art, or rather it takes one of the characters, it is kind of one you can read straight after Lost Art, and you will get probably a little bit more from it if you've read Lost Art as well. Yeah.
And I wondered if when you wrote that, it was because you'd really missed working on the Lost Art of Keeping Secrets and you wanted to take that thread through, or was it just the character that you felt needed more exploration?
Yes, the character of Inigo, who's Penelope's brother, I loved him, and he was quite he featured in Lost Art. He was very young in Lost Art, and I always liked the idea that he was in Lost Art. He was this guy who by total chance had managed to get his hands on very, very early Elvis Presley records, because his aunt and uncle knew Elvis before he was famous and brought the records over to England. So there's this kind of running theme that Inigo is the first person to, by complete chance, is the first person to hear Elvis, and it turns him into a musician. It turns him into someone who wants to do rock and roll. So in the early 60s, you understand what happened to him on this journey. And I found that just an interesting point in history to write about, the kind of early rock and roll and pre-Beatles, pre-Rolling Stones, just on the cusp of everything, and he was there at that point in history. So that was really fun to write. Yeah.
And what was it that gave you that idea of being kind of the first person to hear Elvis in the UK?
Well, I guess just this idea that somebody must have been that person, and how it was how such a global superstar affected a load of teenagers. And as I said, they weren't even called teenagers at the time. The word hadn't even been invented. It should be that somebody, so that teenagers were kind of incredibly influenced by this amazing American star, who they were likely never ever to see live ever, because he didn't, he wasn't going to come over to England and tour, because people didn't do that in those days. So all they could do was hear this vinyl, and kind of create their own story out of it and out of this new sound. And I just found that a real thrill to write about. Yeah.
And we've also got a question about butterfly sting.
Oh my gosh.
Somebody, if you could tell us about that. Someone wants to know, was it meant to be about Muhammad Ali's quote? So could you tell us a little bit about
that? Yes, definitely the title came from the quote. Yes, of course. That's so nice to be asked about Butterfly Sting, because no one ever asked me about my first two novels, because they were written when I was really young, and they kind of came out and then disappeared, and then I had Lost Art, which was a big hit, and so people tend to think that's my first book, but actually I did write 2 books before that. And Butterfly Sting, my daughter read Butterfly Sting, and it's her favorite one of my books, which I always love, because I don't think I've even read it since I wrote it, because I feel like it was written so long ago that I kind of go, oh gosh, would I find that really hard to read now? Because it's very much written by an early 20-something girl, sort of doing a bit of a Jilly Cooper, but not as well. So I'm always thrilled when anyone brings it up. It's very nice. Thank you.
We've also got a question which I thought we'd got through without somebody asking. I also noticed that you're Sir Tim Rice's daughter. Would you ever collaborate? I thought we'd got through with that. Sorry.
Oh no, I'm very happy to say that I'm Tim Rice's daughter. Collaborate with him on a show or something. I don't know. I think he's done okay, so I don't think he needs to collaborate with me.
I don't know. I don't know. His career's not been great, has it? I mean,
well, you know, it's been patchy, but it's fine. He's doing all right. He is. I mean, I collaborate with him in that I do a lot of. My brother and I do lots of work with my dad, in that we go and see the shows, and we are involved in lots of the. When the shows come on again, for example, new productions of Chess or of Evita and that sort of thing, we're always involved in them in that sense. Yeah, so we are very collaborative with him, and we're very involved in his work, but not necessarily the writing side of it. Yeah.
But I guess you grew up in a household in which writing was just expected and important, and you were able to, take on that love of writing, which is perhaps a beautiful gift to have.
Yes, definitely. Yes, it was always around, and music was always around, and words were always around. So yeah, for sure.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Eva. It's been a real joy to talk to you today, because, as I say, I absolutely loved The Lost Art of Keeping Secrets and Tara Jupp. I'm going to avoid that word I find hard to say. It's gorgeous. This could be everything. It's out now. It's out now in hardback, and it's really lovely. It's very easy to read, and it's beautifully written, and it's easy to read, and it will take you back to the 90s, as all of us Goldsters were very much a part of that then. I'm just going to tell everybody quickly what is coming up. So tomorrow, my author actually pulled out yesterday because she can't make tomorrow. So what we're doing is I am actually going to be talking to you about my first biography of Lizzie Siddal, to coincide with the Rossetti's exhibition, and I'm very, very excited because she's just coming out in a new edition as well. And she's also, actually, she's the same age as The Lost Art of Keeping Secrets. She came out for the first time in 2004. Lizzie Siddal herself obviously came out a lot earlier, in the 19th century. So I'm going to talk to you about The Tragedy of a Pre-Raphaelite Supermodel, Lizzie Siddal, tomorrow, normal time on Book Club. So do come along and join us for that, because it's going to be really fun. And in fact, I'm very much looking forward to it, because I haven't had a chance to talk about Lizzie for a little while. And then just to say that Humphrey is back with you next week. He is talking to Vordine England, the author of Fortune's Bazaar, The Making of Hong Kong. That's going to be really fascinating. As you all know, Humphrey was the BBC Asia correspondent, so he's got some fantastic contacts throughout Asia. And then our book of the month this month, we're being slightly retro here as well. We're going back a decade. We are reading together The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry by the brilliant Rachel Joyce, who I have tried to get on to come on to Goldster, by the way, but I think she's quite shy about doing speaking engagements. But as you possibly know, her writing is beautiful, and there's a new film out, so I thought it would be a fun one to do this month. And for those of you who like to know in advance, next month in June, we are doing Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, because it's June. It's got to be Mrs. Dalloway month. And if you haven't read it, or if you haven't read it for years, it's just such a glorious book to rediscover, or to discover for the first time. We've got some lovely comments coming in. Good luck with the TV production, and good luck with the musical as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. It's been great fun. Thank you. Good luck with all of your writing, to all the writers out there.
Take care, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow. And thank you so much, Eva.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Bye.